Good. There we go. Great. Evening, Deb.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It's great to see you, and thank you for coming in and speaking with us tonight. I'm just going to make sure we're in the room and everything. Yes, brilliant. Good. Hi, everybody. Oh, great. So, I've really been looking forward to this, Deb, because my own understanding of this is limited, and I can probably count on one hand the number of dogs that I've worked with, actually, as it happens, and we've had sensory losses of different sorts, and I'm really looking forward to learning from you. People are coming in now. Hi, Mary. Hi, Nicole. Great. Hi, say hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, they're piling in now, which is great for us. Good. Well, we've got a lot to cover, I think, and we've spoken, of course, off air and had a bit of a chat and things, and I'm really excited to learn things. Hi, Jason. Oh, South Africa. Nice. Hi, Shauna. Hi, Angela. Oh, hi, Molly Jo. All coming in. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. So, Deb, let's start from the beginning, really. I always like to ask people about how they came into working with dogs and what influenced them on that journey and what informed them about their approaches. So I'm really interested in how your dog journey started, and especially how that ended up kind of translating into having a passion, really. I guess, having spoken to you, it really is for wanting to work with dogs who had these kind of sensory challenges, I guess is a good way of putting them, whether it's because they're deaf or because they're blind, or in some cases both. So start wherever you want to start, however far back you want to go.
I was the frustrated dog lover as a child. I wasn't allowed to have a pet dog until I was, I'd say, I think I was 12. So I loved everyone else's dogs from afar. And I ended up going and spending some time living with a family friend of ours. And they had a lovely generic brown golden type dog that they found on the road. And I was a very angry child at the time and very defensive. I didn't want anyone to get close to me because I didn't want to be rejected. And so I was keeping everyone at arm's length, including this lovely dog. And as much as I wanted to connect with her, I was like, you got to stay over there. I can't let anyone see that I'm, have this soft spot for you. And true to the dog's nature, as we know of all dogs, she would not leave me alone. And so I fell for this dog, and she truly changed my life and my heart and helped me to connect with other people, helped me to connect with myself. And very shortly after that, my parents brought me home a puppy. So that's how I got started. And then fast forwarding, because, there's quite a lot that happened in there. But when I was 19, I was starting my career professionally with dogs. And I took a summer job working for a pretty well-known collie breeder in the up in the New England area in the United States. And my first day there, they took me around, they introduced me to all the dogs. And in this one giant fenced area were close to a dozen 9 to 12-month-old rough collie puppies who had had no training whatsoever. So if you can imagine, we walk in, there's fur and there's teeth and nails and things just flying. Everybody's so excited. And I was told, see that white dog over there? When you feed her, you have to stand guard over her so that her siblings don't eat her food. And I thought, okay. And I didn't think much about it. And they said, she can't see or hear. And then we went on with the tour, meeting the rest of the dogs. And I remember that I wasn't particularly concerned or struck with that information at all until later that day when I walked in to feed the dogs. And I had a big stack of bowls and I walked in, and as quickly as I could, I'd put one down and walk and put one down and walk so that the dogs would stop jumping on me. And the very last dog was this white beautiful, beautiful white collie. And I remember as I stood there and I watched her eating, that's when all the thoughts came. Like, how is she blind and deaf? She was just running around with this pack of dogs. I wouldn't have been able to tell. And then it was, oh, the poor dog. You know, what happened to her? Is this a fluke? You know, all those emotions started coming up. And then I got curious and I had all the questions. And this dog is what started my passion for working with blind and deaf dogs. I was there at this job for the summer. And so every day on my break, I would go get this dog that I had fallen in love with, and I would get her out and we'd eat my sandwich together. And, you know, I taught her how to walk on a leash and how to fetch a ball and how to come when I called her and how to jump over a jump. Nobody told me you can't teach a blind and deaf dog how to do these things. We were just having fun, having a relationship. And at the end of the summer, I offered to purchase her from the breeder. And I thought the breeder would be thrilled because I still thought this was a fluke and that she would want the dog to have a good home. And they said no. And of course, I was crushed because, you know, I'd come to love this dog and I wanted to take her home with me. But what they said next is what really cemented this for me. And they told me that when she was old enough, she was going to have surgery done on her eyes so that they appeared normal. Not that she'd be able to see, but that people who looked at her, her eyes would appear normal, and they were going to use her for breeding. And I had that exact reaction. I was floored. I couldn't believe that someone, first of all, why would you go to the expense to have her eyes fixed so they looked normal to someone else if they weren't going to function? And why would you want her in your breeding program? So that's when I realized that this was not a fluke. There was something else going on here. And of course, you know, back then there was no internet. There was no, you know, way to go out and search for things other than sitting in the library. And I made it my mission that I was going to figure out what was going on. And it turns out that this was a case of merle to merle breeding. And so the color pattern of merle in the coat, when you breed two dogs that have that together, you can have this, it's often called a double merle. But the puppies can be born with visual and or hearing impairments. And there's a whole long history of this was hidden by breeders. So if they wanted to use this in a dog like this in their breeding program, like this particular breeder did, it was kind of a big secret, which explains why she would want her eyes to look normal. So if people came to see her or the puppies, you know, they maybe would think that she's able to see. Or oftentimes they were just killed quietly behind the barn. You know, as they were born, oh, here's a white puppy. Let's just do away with it, and then nobody will find out. But it took me many, many years to piece all of this together and to find all of the information that explained to me what was going on. But by that time I was hooked, and I wanted to help these dogs. I wanted to help educate people. And as I started to do that, other people came to me, and, you know, dogs can lose their vision or their hearing for a number of different reasons. They can be born that way. And it may or may not have anything to do with this merle to merle breeding. They can have an infection or an injury. They can have a genetic condition where, especially with vision, as they get a little older and they start to mature, so young adult age, they can lose their vision from a number of different conditions. And then, of course, our lovely senior dogs. And if we live with dogs long enough, we're probably going to have some experience with our own personal dogs of they're losing their sight, they're losing their hearing. I have a senior dog myself who's going through that right now, and it gets you in the feels, you know, you're like, oh, they're getting older, and I deal with blind and deaf dogs all the time, but it doesn't make it any easier for me to see him, learning how to adapt, and for me to have to learn to adapt how I communicate with him.
That's a really important point, that about how we have to recognize the adaptations that we need to make, which are probably more important actually, but we think about from a supportive point of view. And I definitely want to unpack all those things, because all those kind of things. But Deb, what a start. Oh my God, that is just the way you talk. I could visualize it. I can visualize young Deb in that situation, and the dog and all these kind of things. And it brings into consideration so many aspects around the ethics of that, not just in that moment, and obviously with the breeder who, by the sounds of it, didn't have many. But even this notion, even if they were thinking, yeah, we're going to give this dog an operation on the dog's eye so they could potentially see better, even that makes you think, for who would we be doing that for, when that dog clearly, from what you described, was really good at adapting in that environment. It was living a great life and doing the things that they could do, and using the many other senses that are available, to kind of navigate that space. So do you think you mentioned about when you were younger, and you, for whatever reason, we won't go into that of course now, but those barriers that you created yourself, and that, and then that dog helped you to kind of find those connections. Do you think that informed you a little bit about these dogs, about thinking, how do you need to connect? What is it, the way that you need to connect to feel safe? And you felt a bit of a connection there, or?
Perhaps, but not at the time. I think every interaction that we have, shapes us, and how we then go and respond to other situations. But I will say that first dog and what he taught me is why I do what I do. It's why I work professionally with dogs. It's why I try so hard to help people develop a connection and communication and a relationship with their dog, because I think that dogs are here to help us as a species to become more human, if that's possible, and to remember things that we seem to have forgotten. Compassion, just all the things that make us who we are as individuals and as people. I think we forget that in our world. And so, this dog was able to bring me into that just by wanting a connection with me. And so I think if we can allow ourselves to have that type of connection with a dog, that they can teach us more than I think we could ever learn on our own. So
I hear you on that. I think, and there's so many people that I've had come and talk to us in the group who their first real kind of noticeably safe connection was through an animal, through a dog, and what that means and what that connection is. And I think parents, when they think about bringing up their children, about the power of the learning that a child can do through animals and Mother Nature and with the dog, learning about consent, learning about reciprocal connections, I think it's powerful. And we lose that sometimes. We live down on the beach down here in Devon, and it was really sad. We saw a couple of kids a couple of days ago trying to chase after the seagulls and kick them, and their parents almost egging them on. And I was thinking, what are those messages early on for that? It's a shame, because that's like the opposite, really. It's a kind of a disconnect. Good. Well, that's a powerful start already, I think, Deb, on these things. And I think you're right. And so when you finished with that breeder then, did you go down a more traditional learning to be a trainer route? Where did you get your education from regarding that? Or did you find that you were kind of self-learned as you started working with these dogs to find out the best way that you can make those connections and helping them to feel safe? So
I had a traditional training background. I learned all the things that I'm embarrassed I ever did to dogs, and I was good at it. But as far as learning how to adapt things to a dog that was visually or hearing impaired, I had to learn that on my own. And for the most part, it came to me intuitively. But of course, you try something and it works or it doesn't work, and then you try something else. But there was really no information at that time, and I think that most people, unless it was your family member already, that had lost their sight or their hearing. Most people weren't going to go out and adopt a dog that they knew had this limitation. And even up until, I would say, 2000. I mean, in 2000, I brought home a blind and deaf Sheltie who had been that way from birth. And there was really no information on the internet about how do you do this? How do you live with a dog like this? How do you communicate with them? Can they learn anything? And as I started this journey and I started keeping my blog to help other people to learn this, I came across a lot of shelters and rescues that if they had a dog come in that was blind or deaf, they would just euthanize. Especially a dog that was blind, because they didn't feel like they would have any quality of life. And I think that that's the biggest myth that I hear is, hey, once your dog loses their sight, or if they're born without sight, they're not going to have a good quality of life. And I just kind of point to my dogs and say, you know, they travel with me, they play, they, you know, they do all the things that other dogs can do. They just can't see or hear while they do it.
So that's a very ableist view, isn't it? I think when we think about that, and also I do wonder whether a lot of the emphasis, things are changing, I know, but in the past has been around a very structured, arbitrary way of training, regardless of your methods, positive or not. Excuse me. And how rigid that kind of philosophy was. So when you had a dog who wouldn't necessarily fit that it's easy to say, well, this dog is therefore untrainable. This dog is therefore can't learn anything. This dog therefore, final conclusion, can't have a quality of life. Is that something you hear a lot?
Not as much anymore, thank goodness. Sometimes I do, and often it's someone who has a dog as part of their family and they lose their sight suddenly. And they're really questioning, you know, and maybe someone has told them, hey, it's not fair to keep your dog alive if they can't see, you know, and so they come to me and they're afraid and they're heartbroken. And, you know, I think a lot of times that perspective comes from us, and we imagine already having our sight. We imagine, so what would happen if I woke up tomorrow and I couldn't see? How could I enjoy all the things that I do now? And I would be so afraid, and I would just want to sit in my house and not go out. And I think we project that onto our dogs. And I think that's the part that really makes it hard for people. But there are people like myself, there are a lot of us out there who have, you know, adopted dogs that are blind or blind and deaf. And we're out there showing people what can be done. And I think when you have a role model, when you can see and experience, oh, look, that dog is doing this and that dog is happy and his tail's always wagging and, you know, he loves to go out on adventures. I think then you can start to picture in your mind that being your dog also. But when there's no reference, you know, our brains just kind of take off and create this, you know, worst case scenario that we're so good at creating.
And also how heavily many are kind of indoctrinated in this notion that somehow we have to verbally connect to our dog in order for them to be compliant, or for them to, you know, to listen to us, in order for us to keep them safe, and how much of an emphasis we put on the communication we have with dogs is about them hearing us, them listening to us, them paying attention to us verbally or visually if we're using hand cues. And I think that is a challenge. And actually, in a way, what this forces people to do is to truly think in a more dog-centered way about how you make those adaptations and those connections.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned earlier, we'll come on to some of the kind of specific stuff in a sec, but is there any evidence about white dogs specifically, regardless of breed, being more prone to sensory losses?
Well, what I know the most about is the Merle to Merle breeding. And I know that, so Merle is a color pattern in the dog's coat. And if there's anyone listening who's not familiar, it's you might think of an Australian Shepherd or a Border Collie or a Sheltie, something that has that really mottled coat, kind of looks like someone just threw a bunch of paint splashes on them. And I love the merle color. A lot of people do. But merle affects the coat color. And so when you have a black dog or a black tri dog and you mate it with a merle, the merle's going to come in and break up the black color, and that's why we see the splotches. The problem is that it can also break up the color in other places. So the nervous system requires pigment for hearing and vision to form normally. So in a fetus, let's say, and if the merle's breaking up the color, there may be important places where that color is not showing up. So very often, not always, but very often, a dog that's come from merle to merle breeding will look predominantly white. Again, not always, but that's because that color, it's now got two of those merles breaking up the color, so there's not a lot of color. And they very often have visual and or hearing limitations in any variety of combinations. That's another thing that people don't realize is it's not you can see or you can't see, or you can hear and you can't hear. It's just like in people, you can have any degree of vision or hearing loss, either in combination with each other or individually.
And yeah, because I was thinking about the prevalence just anecdotally of things like white English Bull Terriers, for example, as opposed to different colours, more likely to have hearing losses or visual losses. And I think that's a really important point about the spectrum, because you think about how many dogs have been classified as being willful, stubborn, disobedient, whereas in fact that sensory input just isn't their primary one, and we're just shouting at them and it's just a kind of muffled noise, or we're kind of giving hand signals, or especially for some of these dogs who might struggle within the social environment about picking up visual cues. These things are important. Good, so let's go into some details then, Deb. Let's think about however you want to do this, really. If we think about vision and hearing separately, about some of the considerations, some of the things we need to think about, and then we can pull them together. And I really want to think about some of the dogs that have been lucky enough to find you, especially Delight, a great name for a dog, and Delight's story, because I think there's a lot for us to learn on that. So whichever way you want to go with that, let's just start looking at some of the specifics around what we need to look at and what we do and the adaptations we make.
Sure. I think, let me start with dogs that are visually impaired, because that seems to be the one that really concerns people the most. It's much easier, I think, for people to deal with a dog that's losing their hearing than their sight, cognitively. So let's start with vision. And the most important thing when your dog is losing their vision, or if you are adopting a dog that's already blind, is that dog doesn't receive any predictable visual cues from the environment. And it's hard to wrap your head around in the beginning. So things like navigating through a doorway, they might sense that the doorway is there, but if I'm trying to lead the dog through, I'm likely to run the poor dog into the side of the doorway because I'm not thinking in that capacity of they're not getting that cue to move over. Many people come to me and they say, my dog's gone blind. He used to love to go for walks with me, and now he won't even leave the front yard. So I try to explain to them, when you come out of your house, what do you see? You can see who's walking down the street. You can see if there's someone and their dog walking down the street. You can see over here if your neighbor's children are out, in the front yard. You can see if a car's coming. There's all these things that you can see that now your dog suddenly is not getting that information. And if you can't see that there's someone and their dog walking down the street, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. And I don't know about you, but if I can't predict what's going to happen, I get a little afraid, right? I don't feel as safe as if I can look and see, oh, this is going to happen. Here's how I can prepare myself. Here's how I can, walk across the other side of the street or whatever I need to do. And so here's your dog who has learned their walk is safe, their walk is happy, but their walk also has all of these visual cues. And now they're coming to the front door and there's none of those visual cues. How are they going to feel safe? How are they going to feel that that's predictable for them and that they can have a little bit of control, even if we have them on a leash? If they can see something coming, they can prepare themselves. A dog can't see, a blind dog can't see if I'm reaching for them to say hello. They just suddenly feel that touch from out of the blue. And I know from experience that our dogs can tell the difference between who's touching them, right? So they know it's not you who's touching them, and it's coming from out of the blue. They're getting startled. And even if they then appear to be okay with it, your body changes as soon as you're startled, and your brain changes as soon as you're startled. And it takes a while, to come back down. So if you have a dog that's losing their vision, but they can still hear, start to talk to them about everything that's going on. Talk to them before you touch them. Talk to them before you pick them up. Tell them that you're going to put their leash on them so that they have that predictability again. And they may or may not understand in the beginning, hey, I'm putting your leash on. But after you do it a few times, the next time you say, I'm putting your leash on, they can mentally prepare themselves. Okay, this is coming. This is what's going to happen. When you groom them, tell them what grooming tool you're going to use. They all feel different. If you say, we're going to cut your nails, that feels totally different. The nail clipper feels totally different than a brush, feels totally different than a comb or like a rubber, curry type thing. So helping them to have information about their day so that they can prepare themselves mentally and emotionally for it will help create that sense of safety again.
Do you think starting things with touch from you first can be helpful? So if I've got the dog here, I'm said, right, I'm going to brush you now, but they feel my hand first, and then the brush comes. Is that something you think sensorily would be helpful for some dogs?
Yes, I think it really could be. Although I would tell them before I touch them. So I'd say I'm touching, and then here comes the brush.
Got you.
And I also do that when I introduce someone new. So let's say I have the dog at the vet and I'm putting them up on the table, and I tell them I'm going to pick you up. I'm putting you on the table. I'm right here. I've got you. And then I will actually make sure I'm touching them before I introduce somebody else, just so that they're already feeling safe and comfortable with me touching them, rather than somebody just reaching out and plunking their hand on them. We know that not everybody is as mindful as we are about reaching out and touching another being. And we know that there are people that like to do the, pat on the head. So I want to have the connection with my dog before I invite someone else into that connection. I find that's helpful.
This is brilliant. So I love this. And I guess you have to really be attuned to this notion of two-way communication in all its forms there. Because I think there's two things about this. One is, I guess the dog over time not only starts to learn some connections, some associations between some of these things, going to pick you up now, I'm going to do whatever. But also more fundamentally, if I hear mum's voice first, something's going to happen and I'm going to be okay. Because that's a quite powerful thing, isn't it?
It is.
And then also, I think if you're putting your hand on the dog and then you're saying, right, this is the vet now, you can pick up just from that tension in the dog, the tightness through the face or whatever, thinking, actually, I'm not ready. Or when they've done the touch, you can then tell, I guess, about how comfortable they felt with that before having more.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't thought about it that way, but it is. And I do adapt and listen to what the dog is telling me. And thankfully I have a wonderful vet too, who will, hey, we need a minute, rather than just hurrying through whatever needs to be done. So that's nice.
What's really interesting, so when I talk about social safety and emotional safety, whether it's for us or the dog or whatever, I often talk about there being 3 foundations to that: processing, what you need to do to process to feel safe in the first place; engagement, the choices you make around engagement and what that engagement looks like; and then exits, finding a way of saying, I've had enough, I need to move on or whatever. Because a lot of trauma comes from lack of agency over engagement and exit. So what's interesting is even a dog who is visually impaired still has the same priorities foundationally. How can I process this? And we have to think outside the box about how that processing might be being done and the time they might need. And I think you're right. I think we are more affected by thinking about visual things because we're such a visual species. I think, the thought of that, I think most people would say, I could manage with a bit of hearing loss and not having a hearing aid in, but I couldn't deal with anything visually, I think, because we're such a visual species. And then engagement, what that engagement might look like. And it's very different. So these things you're talking about here is how you create that engagement in a way that the dog can connect to it. And then, of course, providing exits. I think it can be very easy to miss out on when those dogs want to find an exit when they've had enough. And that kind of thing. So when you think about that dog then who, like you say, they've got those visual cues that they may have had before, and they're losing those visual cues, those cues of safety, actually, a lot of the time.
Right.
Is it about slowing things down? Is it about just having that front door open and letting the dog pick up the sense of the local neighborhood and giving them a verbal commentary maybe of things that are happening and waiting for them to show that they're ready to explore more? Is that the kind of approach you take?
I do. And it can be challenging for people because they're used to going out with their dog every day at this time and having fun. And now their dog's like, no way. But not even just in their home. Like if your dog enjoys car rides and will still get in the car, take your dog for a car ride and go park at the park and open your door, the window, and just sit with them in the car and just let them hang out, because they have to learn how to reprocess now. Right.
Yeah.
They may know the smell, they may know the sounds, they may know how the grass feels or how the sidewalk feels, but they don't have the visual input to go along with it. So they still, in my experience, need to reprocess that this is safe without that additional piece of information. We know how great dogs are at reading contexts when only one thing has changed. And so, I think it's important to let them have the time that they need and not push it.
Yeah.
And if you do, you'll find that eventually your dog is going to be like, I think I want to go, check this out over here or check that out over there, and just go with them, as long as it's safe. I mean, obviously you don't want them falling off of, the side of the porch or something. But as long as it's safe, go with them and encourage them and explore with them. Like sometimes I'll sit on the ground. If it's a small dog, I'll sit on the ground with them and just let them come with me, and we just explore together.
Because their connection to the world will change through that sensory loss, as it would with us. And it is a transitional thing, and it will invariably bring with it extra stresses and things. But dogs are remarkably adaptable if we give them that time that you're talking about. And what you're describing there is what we think about and what we know about sensory mapping and how the different senses map different things. Excuse me, and allowing the dog the chance to do some of that olfactory mapping, like say even just sitting in your car with the boot open and let them take in the things and think, I kind of know these scents. These are a sense that I feel comfortable with. I kind of know. Maybe I'm at the dog park, whatever it is that's going through their brain, and allowing them safely, like you say. I think it's a really important thing regarding changes in environment, which is a big thing, I'm sure, for dogs who are visually impaired, because like I say, they can't see that step, or they sorry, I've got a bit of a tickle in my throat. So, so is it good then to do things like making sure you don't move stuff around the house too much, giving them points? Is it worth adding olfactory markers, smells around the house to give the dog some kind of anchor points even?
So I don't use extra scents in the house. Some people do, and they seem to have good luck with that, but my dogs can tell one room from another already by smell. And so I have a couple blind dogs at my house also. They can go to the corner to the toy box. They know what toy they're looking for, even though all the toys smell the same. They're all heaped in there, right?
Wow.
They will dig in that toy box to find the toy that they want or the bone that they want. So I can't pretend as a human to know what it smells like if I put different scents all over my house. Now, I have done some scent training, some nose work training, and things with my dogs. And I know that in order for that to be effective, you need to contain the scent until you're ready to use it. So if I put a little bit of, lavender over here and a little bit of vanilla over here, they're not going to stay there, right? That scent's going to just travel, throughout my house. So I don't find that it's a necessary thing to do that. I do try to keep my big furniture in relatively the same place. Although I travel with my dogs, and so they get used to new hotel rooms. They get used to, my mom's house or my brother's house and the way the furniture is there. So they are pretty adaptable once we give them the tools and the communication. So you can teach your dog, be careful. It means there's something in front of you, slow down, so that when they are exploring a new place, you can keep them from running head first into something and causing, fear or anxiety or even an injury. But it's kind of up to us to take that sense of safety that we create and surround the dog with it wherever they are.
You find over time that they sense they're in a new environment and they're naturally a little bit more cautious and they kind of mooch around a little bit more? Or do you still find, like with a lot of dogs, that they're quite elevated and they're like, yeah, I'm here, and they need mom to kind of say, okay, be careful, and we need to...
It depends on the dog. I see both. It depends on the dog. Even of my own dogs, one of them is very much, hey, I'm just going to go into this new environment, I'm going to check it out, I'm going to map it out and kind of take over. And the other one is a little more cautious of, I'm going to sit here by your leg for a while till I feel like I've gotten a sense of things, and then I'm going to move out. Because I think it is important still to realize that each dog's going to respond differently.
Yeah. And do you think dogs, when we think about some dogs who have had a lot of heavy training early on in their lives when they had their full sensory makeup, do you kind of see them transition to almost starting to rely on their nose again, when in fact they've gone through a period of kind of looking for visual cues a lot of the time and listening to auditory cues from the caregiver and things like that? You almost have to invite them to find their nose again, or did that happen naturally anyway?
I think I would answer that the same way. It's an individual thing. I had a dog who had been born deaf and with a visual impairment, and I thought he used his nose quite a bit because he couldn't see hardly anything at all. But when he lost all of his vision, it was really hard for him, and he didn't seem to have any idea about using his nose. So I really had to help him and encourage him, by sprinkling treats around and just trying to get him used to the fact that you can have your head down and be, exploring.
Yeah. Brilliant. So I'm scribbling away lots of notes here. So if we think about, we've covered a little bit about visual loss. Auditory loss, what's the difference in mechanics there for you for a dog who loses their hearing? And what are the things we need to think about, and what do we need to think about regarding the adaptations and the training we might do?
A dog losing their hearing is going to probably sleep a little more soundly. And so that means they might wake up a little more defensive if they're woken up suddenly, they may startle and come up out of that sleep and not know what's going on because they're not getting that little bit of auditory feedback that our other dogs are getting, even when they're sleeping, right? Their brain is still processing. So I do a lot of tactile games. So I'm going to touch you, I'm going to give a treat. I'm going to touch you, I'm going to give a treat. And we work up to, I'm going to give you an unexpected touch, like while you're, looking the other way kind of thing. And I teach people about how can you wake up your deaf dog, more gently. So there's the fun way of let's put a treat under their nose and see if they smell it and wake up. It doesn't work for my dogs. They will just sleep right through it. But they often are sleeping on something. So they're sleeping on a blanket or a dog bed or my bed. And so I can take the blanket or the bed and wiggle it a little bit. So I'm not actually touching the dog, which is like a real startle, but it's enough of a wiggle that they sort of, open an eye and they're like, well, what's going on? So that's one way to do it. Another way is that I will blow on them. My dogs actually have longer hair, so I like to blow on the long hair behind their ears, and you can see their ear kind of twitch before they wake up. Now my two dogs that are blind and deaf have learned, I've taught them that when I blow on them, I want them to come to me. So they're actually getting the scent also of that cue. But even if you haven't taught your dog, just blowing a little bit on them can be enough to bring them up out of a sound sleep. So those are some things that can be a little kinder. I don't like being jolted out of a deep sleep. I don't think anybody does. But if I come out of one, I feel that. I feel my heart pounding. I feel that what's happening, and I feel the kind of, I don't know what's going on, going through my brain, and it takes me a while to process. And I don't want to do that to my dogs. So
yeah, we can all relate to that. I think how important it is to kind of come out from rest rather than, like I say, just have a very rude awakening that's automatically going to get your defensive brain going. What are the kind of different aspects? I think this is a good time to bring in a lot of the discussions around vibrating collars for deaf dogs, because they can't hear the recall and that kind of thing. We can look at that specifically, but also more widely about the kind of trainings you might do to support that dog in the environment and the different things that you found that have been successful. So whichever one you want to deal with first. Yeah,
that's a really big myth, is that you need to have a vibration collar to communicate with your deaf dog. And I hear it a lot. I see it a lot on social media. Thankfully, things are starting to change and people are realizing that there are other options. I have a lot of thoughts around the subject of using a vibration collar, but the reason that I don't, and the reason that I don't recommend it to my clients, is mostly because of the dog's experience. The dog can't choose whether to put it on or take it off or turn it off. The dog can't get away from it. So I know that there's talk about, you vibrate it and you give a treat and, you help them associate this with a positive thing. But I think about myself, and I think about when I have my phone with me and I put it on vibrate, like I know what the vibration means. It means I've got a notification, someone's trying to get a hold of me, or there's a new funny, meme on social media or something that I might want to look at. But after 5 or 6 times of that going off in the day, I can feel, when it goes off, I can feel that stress level. And I can choose to turn it off. I can choose to put it over here. I can choose to leave it at home while I go walk my dog. And my dog really can't choose any of that if I'm strapping this on their neck. And some dogs don't seem overly concerned by it, but that doesn't mean that their stress level is not going up each time it's used. I have unfortunately seen dogs that have become reactive because they've been taken out to the park or something. Caregiver sees a dog in the distance, they buzz the collar, the dog's looking at the other dog, right? And so they're starting to associate. So I've seen that happen. I've seen dogs that are really panicked. I've seen dogs where their anxiety levels have gone up. And, you know, this is a choice that I'm making for my dog. I can teach my dog to tolerate his leash, even to act excited, right, about his leash, because it means he's going outside. But does he really like his leash? Like the dog's leashes are laying here within their reach in my room here, and they're not going over and interacting with the leash and saying, oh, I love my leash, until I pick it up. Right? So do they really love the leash? I don't know. I teach cooperative grooming because it's something I have to do with my dogs. But just because my dog will lay there and hand me a foot to do his toenails, and he gets a treat afterwards, does he really like it? I'm not so sure. If he had the choice of never having his nails cut again in his lifetime, or having this done on a regular basis, I bet my dogs would say, yeah, we'll just let them grow. You know, if my dog had a choice of going out without their leash or with their leash, I know what one they would choose. Doesn't mean they're unhappy on their leash. But it's something that we're putting in place as a human for our convenience. And I just have an ethical thing about that. If I can't tell for sure what this is doing to my dog and to their stress level and, you know, to their perception, do I have a right to do it if it's not necessary? So my argument is there are other options. There are other things that we can do that work really, really well for getting a deaf dog's attention, for getting them to come back to us. Very often people will argue and say, well, I want my deaf dog to be able to be off leash. He won't be happy unless he's off the leash. I don't know about where you live, but where I live, there's a lot of places that either it's not legal or it's not safe to have any dog off the leash. I don't care how good their recall is. But again, it's for someone else's, it's for a person's convenience.
Yeah. And this is why, actually, when we think about adaptations, the dog has to make theirs. But a lot of it falls on us, and the expectations on us to think about the adaptations that we need to make. And I think those checks and balances that you were talking about, when we just consider all the time about the welfare considerations of anything, we have to just sit comfortably with that and just think about those things. And there are many things, and it's not rights or wrongs, but there are many things that we do that are more for our convenience. There just is, and that's something we always have to kind of weigh up. And I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it is something that we hear a lot, even over here in the UK, where we've got shock collars being banned. People trying to keep the shock collars were saying, well, we need them for the deaf dogs. You know, that's the reason we've got to keep them going, because we can use the vibrate function on the shock collar and all these kind of things, these kind of discussions to get around it. And I suppose one thing about any kind of thing like that, if the dog doesn't respond first time, are you going to keep pressing it until they do? That's the problem with anything, really, is it?
Right.
So what are some alternatives then? What kind of things do you suggest to your clients then? How would you navigate that with the deaf dogs?
I love to teach automatic check-ins.
So
what that means is I'm not going to try to get my dog's attention. I'm not going to wave my arms. I'm not going to say, oh, I have a treat. I'm just going to go about my business, say on a walk, and my dog is automatically turning and checking in. We keep going. He turns and checks in. I want him to be paying attention to me so that I know. I haven't actually timed it, but I would say, so I have a collie who's both blind and deaf, and we go out on walks, and he will check in with me. I want to say probably about every 8 seconds. just by either coming back to me and touching me, or, going past my legs. So he's touching me. Hey, are you still there? But that lets me have an opportunity to then give my deaf dog a signal. But my deaf dog is 30 feet in front of me, and he's been checking in, and I say, yeah, keep going. And, he's been checking in, and suddenly I need him. When he turns to check in, I can be giving my recall signal for him to come into me. So that works really, really well. And in the beginning, I start in the bathroom. There's not much going on in the bathroom, right? I go in, I shut the door, I have my dog, I have some treats, and I just wait. And probably, since my dog has been in the bathroom before, they're going to be like, why are we in the bathroom? And is going to look at me. As soon as they look at me, they're going to get the treat. And so they learn in a very kind of visually boring environment. And then I move that to different rooms of the house. I move it to my front yard, my backyard. And then when I start going out on a walk, I always carry food with me. And I'm always, every time they check in. And if you have a dog that after the first treat is walking like this, staring at you, you just input other information, because what they're doing is they're looking at you for some information. So you can either, pet them or smile, or just say, hey, give them the signal that we're going to continue. And over time, they learn that. And then I start to add a long line in places that it's safe to do so. So that is my favorite way of getting a deaf dog's attention in a hurry. I also have an emergency recall, and that is always fed with tons and tons of treats. I never try to wean off the treats. So if I'm just walking casually and I want my dog to come to me, I just sort of, use the come to me signal, or I bend down. But if I really need them in a hurry, I make a really large signal. So my large signal is I reach straight up and straight down very quickly. And the dog knows that as fast as you can get to me, I'm going to open my hand and I'm going to have something magnificent in it. So I teach that, but I always reinforce it, because it's a safety thing. It's important if I ever really needed them to come back in a hurry.
And recalls anyway, for me personally, there's no such thing as 100% recall anyway, because there's always, even for a dog who's got its hearing and can hear the whistle and everything else, there's always going to be potentially. So we always have to be mindful of the environment we're in. And I think having a dog that checks in regularly, I call it bubble training with my dogs and my clients, which is visible bubble that I just want. For me, I do it that I want the dog to know that us humans are really unpredictable. And if I don't keep an eye on them, they could be anywhere now. Because without knowing it, we do kind of follow our dogs. So they're like, okay, you're going to come then. But if they're looking, thinking, oh, they've gone over there now, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, they start to stick to you a little bit more, because they want to stay in that bubble. And that's kind of a version of what you're describing there, really, is this connection. So I want to talk a bit about delight, because you've got a dog here who is both blind and deaf, and has been blind and deaf from birth. Straight outside the box. And I think for any of us, even people, I've been training and been involved in dog behavior for about 15 years. Even I'd be thinking, wow, where do you even start with that? Where do we go with that? Where do you get that dog to feel safe and connected? So can you share some of that story with us, and some of the things that you look at and some of the things you do? Because, just talking to you off air, I just think it's an amazing story of two living nervous systems finding connection and safety in a very deep, visceral way, actually, that isn't kind of falsified through other kind of connections. It has to be just that, doesn't it?
Yeah. So she's really teaching me a lot, because I'm also, not only is she blind and deaf, but I'm also raising her a little bit differently than I have my puppies in the past. So let me maybe talk about when I brought her home. So she's 10 months old now, and I brought her home when she was 12 weeks old from a rescue. And she came to me with some pretty significant and concerning behavior patterns. She was resource guarding, and she meant it. She had some repetitive compulsive behaviors that were pretty heavily ingrained already at 12 weeks. And she had a very quick switch. So she was very highly aroused at anything almost immediately and couldn't settle down. And then when you take into account, she's a puppy, right? She's coming into a new environment, new people, losing any other dogs that she had around her, to provide. So all of her safety is gone. And so I started to just try to think about her experience. And when she was running around the room and frantic, it wasn't funny, like some people say, oh, look, the puppy is, doing zoomies around the room. It was concerning to me because she had this need. She had some need that she was frantically searching for, something. And so I started out just holding her, and she actually would lay with her head up on my left shoulder so she could feel my heartbeat and she could feel my breathing. And I just held her until she calmed down. And she really started to respond and calm down sort of quicker and quicker over time. But then the amazing thing is that instead of doing her compulsive behaviors, or instead of, having puppy crazy time, she was coming over and putting her 2 front feet on my knee while I was at the computer, for instance, or watching TV. And I realized she was asking me to help her to calm down and to help her kind of self-soothe. And so I would pick her up and I'd hold her, and she would almost immediately like sink into me and I have this deep sigh kind of thing. And I'd hold her for a few more minutes. And then when I put her down, she was fine. And she was able to go and, find her own dog bed and settle down and maybe chew a bone, or maybe, cuddle with, her little stuffed toy or something. But she needed that little bit of help, and she learned that she could come ask for it. And when I think back to all of the training advice that we hear, and there's still out there these voices that say, don't give in to your dog if they're trying to get your attention, you're going to spoil them, you're going to create things. And I thought, that just doesn't resonate anymore. And so I've really taken this whole puppy raising thing with, what is this behavior trying to tell me? What is she trying to accomplish with this behavior? And it doesn't mean I don't get frustrated with puppy behaviors. And it doesn't mean, that I'm always right. But I try to, instead of stopping the behavior or teaching another behavior, I try to meet whatever needs she has. It's been really fascinating for me to watch her learning at her own pace, and watch her finding out what's safe and what's not safe, and asking for what she needs, and just watching her behavior change, like without me doing anything. Like, am I out of a job as a dog trainer? Like, if everybody started to do this, that would be amazing. So yeah, it's been really fun with her, and watching these changes, and just deepening my understanding and my connection with her, and seeing that, yes, every time I picked her up as a baby, like sometimes it was all the time. Sometimes it was, I'm on a Zoom call and I'm picking up my puppy. I'm putting my puppy down, picking up my puppy. But now, so she's 10 months, so she's maybe doesn't need mom as much anymore. But she will still sometimes come. She doesn't come all the time. She doesn't pester me about it. But she will come and put her 2 front feet up on my leg and wave her one paw in the air like, hello, I'd like some attention, please. And that's all she wants. She just wants to come up and have that connection. With my other dog, who can see, we can have a connection across the room. right? We
Yeah.
can gaze at each other and have that connection for a moment, or I can say something to him and he doesn't even get up from his bed. It's just a moment of connection. Hey,
Mm.
we're all here, we're all safe. With her, I can't do that. And so sometimes I get busy doing my human things and she'll come and say, hey, I need I need a moment of connection. And it just takes a minute for me to hold her. And then she's like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to get down.
It's really beautiful and extremely powerful, and it's almost an extreme example, really, of what a lot of people are thinking about now, about what we do in the first sort of 6 to 12 months of a dog, where we've always had a very heavy training bias with pups. My husband and I have done something similar with Molly. She has all her senses, but we took a similar approach, which was we'll learn from her, and we'll try and co-regulate when she dysregulates, which is what you're talking about there, and you're talking about in a very literally your nervous system and her nervous system connecting through that touch. And one of the big kind of myths, because we tend to have more traditionally seen everything in forms of how things are reinforced and and all that kind of thing, we forget that actually the real world is bigger than that. Our lived experience is more than that. And you've explained there with Delight, where rather than do more of those things, she's done less of them. She's felt more confident. She's able to self-regulate more because she's able to feel that connection and to find that safety. And more importantly, Deb, this is such a beautiful thing. I feel like I want to cry when I think about it, that you're her return to safety.
Mm.
That's a beautiful thing. And I think, when I think about Molly, she was in a pen in our room, then we let her on the bed. She stayed on the bed probably until she was 10 months old at night. Now she gets on the bed first and then she gets off. So this notion, you're going to set yourself up now for a whole lifetime because the dog's going to have to be on the bed with you. That's what she needed when she was younger. She needed that connection. There was a point where she couldn't cope so well in the pen. She needed more from us. So we let her in, but that doesn't mean, it's like with children, it doesn't mean that just because you've got that little kid in the bed because the thunderstorm's going, that you're going to end up with an adult still sharing your bed with you, when they're grown up. So I think we just have to think about these things, about how that brain becomes more independent, the safer they feel. I think that's important.
Yeah, super important.
So actually the hour's flown by there, Deb. There's so many things. I just wanted, before we go though, what I hear you saying really is connection, trust, and safety first, regardless of whether, whatever it is that we're looking at. And then finding ways that ability to communicate is very much stepping into that dog's appreciation of what that communication is. So this truly is a dog-centered approach. You have to, I guess, because like you said as well, every dog is different. Even though you might have two dogs that both lost their sight, that might mean different things to both of them, and how they adapt or not, and how much time they need to make those adaptations, and from what point of sensitivity they already came from before they lost that sense.
Exactly. I think it boils down to how would we want to be treated, and how would we treat, say, our best friend. I mean, dogs are called man's best friend, but I think sometimes we get caught up in our own perspectives and our expectations and our own, what we call needs. And sometimes they are our needs, but sometimes they are for our convenience. And we sort of ignore our dog's needs, I think. And so this has been, this experience with Delight has been really incredible for me and taken me to the next level as a dog professional, because through my experience now I can share with my clients and my students, it's okay. Like, it's okay to pick your puppy up if they want to be picked up. And I could say that before, but now I can say, look, here is the experience that I've had, and I know it will be okay. And I think sometimes hearing it from a professional gives us permission to think a different way. Just like me saying there are alternatives to using a vibration collar with a deaf dog. That coming from me as a professional who specializes in this area, I think gives people the option that they can look at a different way of doing something, as opposed to being, in these little rigid, it's just an outdated piece of advice, but I think we get stuck in it because we don't have someone who we trust who can tell us that there's a different way.
And I think a lot of the time, I bet you get it that without knowing, because there's a lack of awareness, but the questions you might get asked by a client, they're kind of the wrong questions because the perception is not right. It is the perception shift that we need, because like you say, the questions we ask are based on the reality of perhaps our past lived experience with that dog, or based on our own perception of what those sensory deficits might mean or not mean. But actually, that what you're providing for clients, and like I say, giving them permission, is to be able to almost step back and have that perception shift, and to kind of work your way up from that. Because then a lot of those questions then become a bit defunct, don't they? Because you can realize that actually that isn't the right question, because there is no answer for that question, but we've got to think about asking different questions.
Mm-hmm.
This has been amazing. We have some great comments in the group. Thank you everybody for joining these things in. Freya says it's one of the best lives in dog centre care that we've had. So thank you, Deb. That's
thank
great. Thank you, Freya. So where can people find more Deb and find out about your work and the things that you do, or if people need to contact you about their own dogs?
So my website is yourinnerdog.com. And you can contact me through the website. You can find my Facebook pages through there, my blog, my books, and all of my online resources. I'm always happy to answer questions from caregivers, from rescues, from professionals, and try to point you in the right direction. And if there are questions in the chat, I'll try to come in and into the group and answer those as I'm able to.
Great, and do make sure you share your work in the group. Anything you write or anything, your blogs and any workshops you do or anything really. I think the group's here, so I'll make sure that you've got a pre-approval thing for that, Deb, so we can have those things coming together. Well, thank you so much. It's been amazing. Thank you everybody for kind of engaging with so many lovely comments tonight, and I think it's really got people thinking, which is what it's about, Deb. I think that's the point. And often, I think, especially for the general public, where do you have a point of reference when you have a dog who has a different sensory experience? There isn't many, and you are, in my opinion, having heard you speak today, and also our chats before, and seeing some of your work, quite a pioneer here, Deb. Because, like you say, where was the stuff originally? It was kind of cobbling together stuff that we'd already do in training and try and fit it into working with a dog with a sensory deficit of some sort. Whereas in fact, you've stepped back and thought, how do we rethink this from the bottom up, really? How do we do it the other way around? How do we make the adaptations ourselves rather than expecting the dog to? Great, good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming in tonight. Thank you, Deb. I've really enjoyed this tonight. We've got another Facebook Live on Wednesday, everybody. We've got Martha Priddle coming in, looking at moving away from looking for compliance with clients, but looking at more of a cooperative model when working with clients. So that's another good one. Thanks, Deb. I really appreciate tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation. It's a good conversation.
Brilliant conversation. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Stay safe for whatever you're doing, and have a good evening. Bye.